September 1941, somewhere over occupied France. 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109 pilots receive a scramble order from their ground controller. An unidentified aircraft has been detected crossing the coast at high altitude. They climb to intercept. After several minutes, they spot it against the grey sky, a twin-engine shape moving fast with no rear turret and no gun positions visible anywhere on the fuselage. By every recognition manual they carry in their cockpits, what they are looking at should be easy prey. The lead pilot pushes his throttle to the firewall and begins his pursuit curve. The gap does not close. He watches the aircraft ahead of him pull away as though his fighter is standing still. Within minutes it has vanished. He lands, files his report, and describes an aircraft with no visible armament that outran the fastest single-engine fighter in the Luftwaffe inventory. His superiors are skeptical. No bomber in the world can outrun a 109, and no one in the Luftwaffe that month has heard of the aircraft they have just failed to catch. They will hear of it soon. By 1943 they will hear of almost nothing else. The question that German pilots, German engineers, and eventually the Reichsmarschall himself would spend the rest of the war trying to answer was not really a tactical question. It was almost a philosophical one. How had the British, a nation supposedly on the defensive, short of aluminium and steel, losing heavy bombers by the hundred over the Reich, managed to produce the fastest operational aircraft in the war and built it out of wood? To understand how, you have to go back to a man who had building aeroplanes from timber been since before most of his future pilots were born. Geoffrey de Havilland founded his aircraft company in 1920. Through the 1920s and 30s, his firm developed a conviction that the rest of the aviation world considered somewhere between eccentric and absurd. De Havilland believed that a properly designed wooden airframe was not merely adequate, he believed it was faster. In 1934 he proved it. His DH-88 Comet, a twin-engine wooden racer, won the McRobertson Air Race from England to Melbourne, covering over 11,000 miles and beating every metal aircraft in the competition. A wooden aeroplane had just outflown the best that aluminium could produce. The world took note and then promptly forgot. In 1938, with war approaching, de Havilland carried that conviction to the Air Ministry. He proposed a twin-engine bomber with no defensive armament at all, no gun turret, no rear gunner, no forward-firing guns, a crew of 2, pilot and navigator, and nothing between them and the enemy except speed. The aircraft would be made entirely of wood and would survive over hostile territory by doing something no bomber in any air force on Earth had been designed to do. It would simply outrun every fighter sent against it. The Air Ministry said no. They said it again and again. RAF Bomber doctrine in 1938 was built around metal construction, heavy defensive armament, and large crews. An unarmed wooden bomber contradicted everything the service believed about aerial warfare. Officials told de Havilland to abandon his design and build wing components for other manufacturers instead. He refused. One man inside the system saw what the committees could not. Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, the Air Council member responsible for research and development, understood that wood did not compete with aluminium for supply, that the workers who shaped it did not compete with the metalworkers building Spitfires, that the workshops producing it did not need to be aircraft factories at all. Freeman forced through a prototype order against the collective judgment of the air staff. The project acquired a nickname inside the ministry that was not meant kindly. They called it Freeman's Folly. Work began in secret at Salisbury Hall, a moated 17th-century manor house near Hatfield. De Havilland's chief designer, Ronald Bishop, led a small team that turned the proposal into an airframe with extraordinary speed. A contract for 50 aircraft was placed on March 1, 1940. The prototype, designated W4050, was rolled out on November 19 that same year. 6 days later, on November 25, it flew for the first time with Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the founder's eldest son, at the controls, less than 9 months from contract to flight. The numbers it posted at Boscombe Down in February 1941 ended every argument the Air Ministry had ever made against it. 392 miles per hour at 22,000 feet, faster than the Spitfire, faster than the Messerschmitt Bf-109, faster than the Focke-Wulf FW-190, faster than every operational fighter in the world, and it was made of birch plywood, Ecuadorean balsa, and Canadian spruce, held together with formaldehyde resin glue. Freeman's Folly was the fastest aircraft in the sky. Nobody used that nickname without irony again. By 1943, the Mosquito had gone from a reconnaissance curiosity to a weapon that haunted the German war effort at every level. On January 30, 1943, the 10th anniversary of the Nazi seizure of power, 3 Mosquitoes of 105 Squadron carried out the first daylight RAF bombing raid on Berlin. The lead crew was Squadron Leader Reggie Reynolds and Pilot Officer Ted Sismore. They timed their bombs to arrive over the capital at 1100 hours, the precise moment Hermann Goering was delivering a radio broadcast to the nation. The broadcast was knocked off the air. All 3 crews returned safely. That afternoon, 3 Mosquitoes of 139 Jamaica Squadron attacked Berlin again to disrupt a speech by Goebbels. 1 aircraft was lost to flak. The raids dropped modest tonnage. Their real damage was psychological. Goering had promised in 1939 that no enemy bomber would ever reach the capital of the Reich. A wooden aeroplane built by furniture makers had just done exactly that in broad daylight and come home untouched. What followed over the next 2 years was a demonstration of versatility no single aircraft type had ever achieved. As a night fighter, the Mosquito destroyed more than 600 Luftwaffe aircraft over Germany and intercepted as many V-1 flying bombs over England. Wing Commander Branse Burbridge of 85 Squadron, flying with his navigator Flight Lieutenant Bill Skelton, became the highest-scoring Allied night fighter ace of the war, with 21 confirmed victories. As a Pathfinder under Air Vice Marshal Donald Bennett, the Mosquito carried the oboe blind bombing system and marked targets for the heavy bomber streams. Bennett's light night striking force attacked Berlin 170 times, including 36 consecutive nights. A single Mosquito could fly to Berlin with a 4,000-pound bomb, return, refuel, and fly the trip again before the slowest heavy bomber in the command had completed 1 round sortie. As a fighter bomber, it carried out precision attacks no other aircraft could have attempted. On February 18, 1944, Mosquitoes of 487 Squadron Royal New Zealand Air Force, 464 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force, and 21 Squadron RAF struck Amiens prison at rooftop height to breach its walls and free French resistance prisoners in Operation Jericho. The raid was led by Group Captain Percy Charles Pickard, one of the most decorated pilots in the service. Pickard and his navigator Flight Lieutenant Bill Broadley were killed when their aircraft was shot down by fighters on the way home. 258 prisoners escaped through the broken walls. Pickard never knew, and through every role, every theatre, every mark of the aircraft, one statistic tells the story that individual missions cannot. The Mosquito's bomber loss rate was 0.65% per sortie. The Lancaster lost 2.2%. The Sterling lost 3.8%. A Mosquito crew flying bomber operations was roughly 3 times more likely to survive a full tour than a heavy bomber crew. The aircraft the Air Ministry had dismissed as a folly became the safest bomber seat in the war. The reason it was fast, the reason it survived, and the reason the Germans never managed to copy it all came down to the same thing. The Mosquito's fuselage was a frameless monocoque shell, moulded in 2 halves over concrete forms, birch plywood outside and in, Ecuadorean balsa between. No rivets anywhere on the surface. The wing was a single piece of spruce and birch. The skin was finished with doped cotton fabric pulled tight and sanded until it was as smooth as polished furniture. Because that is what it was. The men and women who built the Mosquito were not aircraft workers. They were cabinet makers from High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire, one of the oldest furniture towns in England. They were coach builders and piano craftsmen. Firms like Parker Knoll and E. Gomme, which in peacetime made dining room tables and armchairs, were shaping wing sections and fuselage halves for the RAF. 6 workers could produce a complete fuselage in a week. The skills they brought were not modern engineering skills. They were inherited craft, the knowledge of grain and moisture and laminate that had been passed down through the generations of English woodworkers. Britain did not train these people for war. Britain had been raising them for centuries without knowing why. And because it was built from wood, the Mosquito consumed no aluminium and occupied no aircraft factory. It did not compete with Spitfire or Lancaster production for a single pound of strategic metal. It was assembled in dispersed workshops across the countryside, in villages and market towns, by people who had never seen the inside of an aeroplane factory and never would. The Germans understood the threat well enough to try copying it. The Focke-Wulf T, A154, designed by Kurt Tank and nicknamed the Mosquito, was ordered into production by Generallufzeugmeister Erhard Milch. It failed. The failure reveals precisely why the Mosquito could only have come from Britain. Wooden aircraft need adhesive that can withstand moisture, heat, and the violent stresses of combat without the structure delaminating in flight. The British had spent generations developing formaldehyde resin glues through their furniture and woodworking trades. The Germans had no equivalent tradition. Their adhesive, Tigofilm, came from a single factory in Wuppertal. Allied bombers destroyed it. Substitute glues could not hold. Test aircraft came apart in the air. Pilots died. The program was abandoned. The Luftwaffe had tried to replicate a British idea and discovered that the idea was inseparable from the culture that had made it possible. In March 1943, Goering summoned the heads of the German aviation industry to his hunting lodge at Karinhall. Willy Messerschmitt and Ernst Heinkel sat in the audience. Goering had been pacing and ranting for the better part of an hour when he reached the subject of the Mosquito. The stenographers recorded his words. "I could go mad when I see the Mosquito," he said. "I turn green and yellow with envy. The Englishman, who can afford even more aluminium than we can, builds himself a beautiful wooden machine. It is a machine that every piano factory over there can make. Sadly, I could kill myself." Then he turned to Messerschmitt and demanded that everyone look at this amazingly primitive aircraft so they might learn something. He told the room to forget their own designs and simply build the Mosquito. They tried. They could not. German night fighter crews gave a name to the constant dread the Mosquito inflicted on them. They called it Mosquito Schreck, Mosquito Terror. RAF, Mosquitoes of 100 Bomber Support Group, equipped with Serrata and Perfecto's radar homing devices, hunted Luftwaffe night fighters around their own airfields. The group claimed 258 enemy aircraft destroyed for the loss of 70 Mosquitoes. The historian Callum Douglas, digitizing German Air Ministry conference minutes, found that the Mosquito appeared in Luftwaffe planning documents more than any other Allied aircraft. It was the only Allied type to receive its own dedicated agenda item at a senior conference. That item existed for one purpose only, to note that a night fighter had finally managed to shoot one down. The honest verdict on the Mosquito is that it was the most unlikely weapon of the entire war. It came from a designer the establishment had dismissed. It was protected by a single champion willing to be called a fool. It was drawn by engineers who believed in a material the modern world had abandoned. And it was shaped into existence by the hands of people who never appeared in any official history, cabinetmakers and craftswomen who worked with balsa and birch in quiet workshops in English towns and built something that flew faster than anything the Luftwaffe could send against it. If your family built Mosquitoes, flew them, or maintained them, their story deserves to be here. Leave it in the comments. Those details, the personal and specific ones, are the real record of what this aircraft meant. Not the statistics or the official reports, but the memory of the hands that shaped it and the crews who trusted their lives to wood, glue, and the inherited skill of a country that never knew it was building a weapon until the moment it needed one. Every like on this video keeps that memory visible. It should be, because the Mosquito was not an engineering project, it was a tradition given wings. And traditions only survive when someone takes the trouble to pass them on.